Okay, welcome everyone. How's everyone doing? We're gonna keep everyone on mute for now. Hope I can keep my kids on mute as well. Doesn't really work the same way. Thank you all for joining us. It's very wonderful to see everyone here. More people are joining us here. We are on live on Zoom and also on Facebook. And we are so pleased that you're here today with us. To begin, we're gonna start with Havdalah. I have my Havdalah here in front of me. If you would like to at home, Havdalah is done after Shabbos. Usually it's customary to be done right after Shabbos on Saturday night, but you can still do it on Sunday or Monday if you didn't have a chance to do so. So we're gonna do that now as we begin the week. We use spices, a candle, and a cup of wine. Or if you have another beverage, you can run a wine, grape juice, or something of the like. So the actual Havdalah, we're going to show you a beautiful video that will be led by the Maccabees. The Maccabees are a vocalist group. We actually had them here in Akron several years ago. And so you'll enjoy that while we begin the Havdalah. So without further ado, on this, we're going to put in the chat box the words to Havdalah, so you could follow along if you'd like to. You can click on the link in the chat box. You're welcome to follow along with the words of the Havdalah as well. So without further ado, we're gonna see the video.
הנה כל ישועתי, הבטח ולא אפחד, כי עוזי וזמרתך השם, ויהי לי ישועה, ושבתם מים בששון.
Hayta
קודש לך.
Okay. All right. You know this song, sing along with us. Shavua tov, 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 Shavua tov. A good week, a happy week. May gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a blessed week. May gladness reign and joy increase. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimera V'Yaminu, Yavo Eleinu, Hey Mashiach ben David, Hey Mashiach ben David. As you heard, we just said Mashiach ben David. The wish after Shabbos is always, we're always wishing for Mashiach. It's one of the most fundamental beliefs in Judaism. One of the 13 principles of faith of Maimonides is a belief in Mashiach. And we hear about Mashiach all the time. It's rabbis always love using in their sermons like Mashiach, right? We wish Mashiach will come, Mashiach will come. What exactly is Mashiach? What is it all about? And I know we've had different talks in recent classes about it. And I want to introduce our guest speaker, Rabbi Ari Shishler, who will enlighten us on this topic and help enlighten me as well. Rabbi Shishler is a motivational speaker, a phenomenal speaker. He's a radio show host as well. And he's also happens to be a Chabad rabbi, the beautiful community down in South Africa. I will say that when we were thinking of bringing Rabbi Shishler, one of the reasons why it pushed us to ask him to join us is because my father actually knew Rabbi Shishler well. He remembers him from the 80s when my father was in South Africa for about a year and a half as a student sent by the Rebbe there. And he remembers Rabbi Shishler from back then when Rabbi Shishler was a kid. And I know that he enjoyed listening to him over the years. As he became a rabbi and a speaker, my father enjoyed listening to him. So I said, if my father endorsed him, then he's definitely the right speaker to bring. So, yeah. So without further ado, please pay attention to Rabbi Ari Shishler.
Thank you, Rabbi Moshe, and thank you to your entire community. It's wonderful to the world that we live in today. You can be on one end of the world and you can speak to people on the other end of the world from the comfort of your own home. So it's great to be together, and for me personally, as you said, it's a very special opportunity to have a connection to Rabbi Mendy, who I knew many years ago when he was here in South Africa. He was a young yeshiva student back then. He had a profound influence on my friends and myself. So it's kind of a tribute in a sense, an opportunity to give back a little bit. So thank you for the opportunity, and please God, we should share many opportunities together to learn, to engage, to interact, and all in good health. So Rabbi Moshe said that rabbis speak about Mashiach in their sermons, which might be true, depending on the nature of the rabbi. I think some of the congregants pray for Mashiach in the middle of the sermon. Anything to get out of here. Anything to end this thing. When will this rabbi finish speaking? But it's kind of like a tagline that people use at the end of their speech. If you listen to certainly Orthodox rabbis, and much more so Chabad rabbis in particular, they always end off with, we should see Mashiach speedily in our days. And then everybody says, Amen, and that's it. You're off to go. Reminds me of a story. I believe it's a true story. There were two religious Jews standing at a bus stop, and they're waiting for the bus to come. I don't know how efficient public transport is in your neck of the woods, but over here in South Africa, there pretty much isn't much of a public transport system. So if you were waiting for the bus, you'd be waiting for a long time. Anyhow, these two guys are waiting for the bus is late. So the one frum Jew turns to the other religious Jew and he says, you know, I think Mashiach is going to come before the bus arrives. So the other fellow says to him, what are you talking about? He says, Mashiach is guaranteed to arrive. The bus, not necessarily so. So the first guy says to him, you must be Chabad. And I think it's true. I think everybody knows that, you know, the concept of Mashiach is a little bit fantastic. It's a little bit far-fetched. It's a little bit up in the air. And Chabadniks are the people who are crazy enough that we actually believe this stuff. It reminds me of another story. I'll tell you a story that really happened to me. It's a true story. And it happened a few years ago. There was a big unity get-together, big Shabbat. They got 200 students together. And they had rabbis representing various different religious organizations. I was the token Chabadnik over there. You know, you're always going to have one Chabadnik to look like you're, you know, like you're inclusive. So I was the token Chabadnik. And during the course of the Shabbat, it was very beautiful, and everybody got to speak on different topics and this and that. And then on Saturday night, they made a big panel, and they put us all on the panel. We sat in a long line. It's very interesting to see rabbis conform to sit in a line. Yeah, it was an interesting experience. And one of the rabbis, who was a non-Chabad rabbi, or as we call them today, you've got to use very politically correct terminology. So in today's world, we call them Hasidically challenged. So here was this rabbi, was not Chabad, he was Hasidically challenged, and he was the what do you call it, the moderator of the whole event. Anyhow, so the rule was that each question, they put these 200 students, they could ask any question to the panel, and each question went in line. The first rabbi got the first question, the second rabbi got the second question. When we got to the end of the line, we went back to the beginning of the line. It was a very successful session, and pretty much everybody behaved themselves and everything went in order. At one point, somebody puts up their hand and says, I have a question about Mashiach. At which point, without blinking, the rabbi who was running the session turns to me and he says, a question about Mashiach, Rabbi Shishler will answer that question. In other words, we'll skip the line. And it was then that I realized, you know, everybody has their area of expertise. So the area of expertise of Chabad rabbis is Mashiach. We're the Mashiach people. Everybody knows we're the ones who sing about Mashiach. We're the ones who, you know, we talk about Mashiach. And we actually take this thing seriously. Somebody once visited the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and they had a private audience with him. And they came out of there and they said, I've never in my life met somebody who has the intellectual spectrum of science, philosophy, literature, modernity all rolled into one, and at the same time has the faith of my Baba, right? That's Chabadniks. We're a sophisticated bunch in certain regards, very tech savvy, you know, we're always, people tell us, I don't know if it's true, maybe they're just trying to be nice to us, but they always tell us, you know, you're in touch, you know what's going on in the world, but we have faith in these strange, apparently legendary, mythical concepts, like a Baba, you know, proper, simple faith. So the question is this, you know, you talk about Mashiach. I know that there were people who lost their jobs, lost their pulpits, because they spoke about this crazy messianic idea. Yeah, messianism, it's for other people, it's for evangelists, it's for happy clappers, it's for people. Jews, we're down to earth, we're looking at pragmatic things like tikkun olam, making the world a more healthy place, humanitarian place. We support welfare. We care about human rights. We look after the underdog. We want to build a beautiful state of Israel that's a democratic state. We want to preserve Judaism in a classic cultural form. But this, come on, this is honestly, really, this is the 21st century. Do you honestly really believe that something's going to change? That is so radical that some rabbi with I just picture this, I don't know how people picture Mashiach, but is it like a rabbi with a white beard and a red cape? Is that how it's going to work? So like I'm flying out of the heavens and it's going to say, ladies and gentlemen, here I am. And CNN is going to broadcast all over the place. Rabbi arrives to bring world peace. I think that may in itself be a miracle if mainstream media is speaking nicely about Haredi Jews. You know what I'm saying? It sounds so unbelievable. How is this thing actually going to happen? And is it real? And is it feasible? And let's ask another question. How important is it? Really? How important? Isn't the most important thing just to be a decent human being, surely? And it's nice if you can uphold a little bit of our heritage along the way. That's a bonus. How important is it to hang on to this really far-fetched belief? And I understand and we respect, it was just International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We have tremendous respect for those hundreds, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of Jews whose last words in the concentration camps, in the gas chambers was, I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah. And we get it. We understand that we're in desperate circumstances and they needed to cling to some kind of a belief, but we're not in those desperate circumstances. We live in comfortable environments where our rights are protected and we can speak our minds as Jewish people and there's no blood libels against us. So do we really need this Mashiach concept? You know, was it just something to keep hope alive through the generations? Or is it relevant? Does it actually speak to us? So that's what we're going to talk about this evening. And I understand that the Zoom environment is a little bit different to usual. You know, if it was a face-to-face, I think it would be a lot easier to make it interactive. We do have a chat forum. So if you have comments or questions, by all means, you know, ordinarily it would be nice to make this a lot more interactive, but let's work with what we have.
Let me comment, Rabbi. We're gonna ask if people do have questions along the way. If you put it in the chat box, by the end we will have an option for people to pose their questions out. So you feel free to put it in the chat box.
Okay, thank you. So there you go. One of the wonders of the modern world, right? I'm pretty certain that if we would have schlepped somebody out of any other period in Jewish history, think about it. If you had to pull a Jew out of the period of the Spanish Inquisition, the Roman Empire, the Greek Hanukkah period, the Crusades, any of those times, and you had to transplant them into our world, and they would see what we're doing now with the Zoom interaction across continents and the various things that we have, they probably would believe that we're already living in the Messianic era. And then that's part of what we're going to talk about. So I'd like to begin firstly, just to talk for a moment about how important the concept is, how central it is to Judaism. We're not going to overspend time on that. I'd rather get more to the question of how real is it? How realistic is it? You know, are we just pie in the sky, kind of crazy people, happy clappers, and we're out of touch? So let's talk for a moment about how central it is. Now, I don't know if anybody over here is in the world of engineering, architecture, construction, any of those things, but you'll know this. You'll know that the most important thing in any structure, whether you're building a high-rise skyscraper or whether you're building blocks with your grandchildren, the same principle applies, and that is that if you don't have a good foundation, everything will collapse. So there was a great sage who we all know and respect tremendously by the name of Maimonides, and he said that Judaism is built on 13 foundations. And if any one of those foundations is weak or missing, the structure could collapse. And he starts to list, for example, faith in God, the belief in one God. Well, if you don't have that, you don't have Judaism. Judaism doesn't tolerate the possibility of polytheism. It's just not an option. It's a monotheistic religion. If you don't believe in one God, that's it, everything falls to pieces. So he goes through a whole string of things that make a lot of sense. The fact that the Torah is valid and divine and will never change, fundamental to Judaism. And then he comes to number 12 and he says, fundamental principle number 12 is the belief in a Messiah. Now that's a shocker. Whoa, hang on a second. So in other words, if that piece of the foundation is not as strong as it should be, you're telling me that the whole of Judaism could collapse? How? Why? Why is this so important? Why is it important enough that there's actually no subject that is repeated as frequently in our prayers as the refrain, please send us the Messiah? And we say it in all different ways. You know, Jews are poetic. We know how to use different ways of saying the same thing. So, but if you look at our prayers, there is no other single message that repeats as frequently as the message, please God, send us Mashiach. So that already tells you that it must play quite a central role. You might be shocked to hear that in the Talmud, some of the greatest sages like Rabbi Yochanan, who was a tremendously respected sage, made this radical comment: the only reason that the world was created is only so that there should be Mashiach. Now, many people are a little bit uncomfortable with that. Mashiach, a person, is there this centrality of one individual? Is it about some kind of hero worship? You've got to be careful with these things. So let's be clear. We speak about Mashiach as a generic term that refers to the persona, but really what we're talking about is a state of the world. So I've got to be really careful, because I don't know right now what people think of the state of the world. You know, in each part of the world, people have different views about this. What is the state of the world right now? But I think we'll all agree it could be a lot better. Certainly, if we could get rid of the coronavirus, I think everybody would agree that life would be a lot better. The world would be a better place. Unfortunately for us, you know, I was thinking about this right at the beginning. It's coming up for a year now of the strange way in which we're living. So early on, just around about Pesach time last year, everybody was talking about the fact, please God, we'll soon go back to normal. And I was thinking about that, you know, go back to, what does that mean? Go back to normal. Because at that time, if you remember, and for months on end, the single topic that everybody spoke about and every media outlet focused on was just coronavirus, right? Remember that? I think that was a good portion of last year. It was just coronavirus. Nobody knew what they were doing and how you're supposed to deal with it, and lockdowns, and do you wear a mask? Don't you wear a mask? And social distancing and all these kinds of things. And everybody was saying, please God, soon life will go back to normal. And if you're a thinking Jewish person, you could immediately detect what's wrong with that sentence. Go back. Jews don't go back. The whole thing that has kept Judaism alive through the most traumatic periods of history, if you think about it, Judaism is like the opposite of a good murder mystery. You know, in a good murder mystery, there's always the serial killer who keeps appearing. Well, we're the serial victim that keeps outliving the killers. So we've been through it all. And the only way we got through it all is because we've always taken the attitude, go forward. That whatever our circumstances may be at the moment, let's look towards an opportunity to have a better situation in the future. So go back to how life was before coronavirus is antithetical to Judaism. Judaism says we've been through things that are a lot uglier and a lot more difficult and challenging than the world is facing now. I mean, it was only 70 odd years ago that we went through a Holocaust. And our attitude as a Jewish nation after that was go forward. Those Jewish survivors who married in DP camps, their attitude was go forward, make the world better. So the world we're in now, our attitude as Jewish people should be go forward. Let's make it better. Because the truth is, if tomorrow the virus would disappear, what do we think? Life would be beautiful? Never. We would then go back to all the old things that used to give us stress and anxiety. Prozac was on the market before coronavirus. We had issues that weighed and bogged us down before this thing happened. So we don't want to go back there. So the world we look at a world that is, unfortunately, I think most people look at it, a world that is chaos, a world that is divisive, a world that is a jungle. And we forget the first story that the Bible told us. The first story of how God designed this world. And yes, human beings are the people who have the possibility and potential to wreck a good thing. That's true. But how did it start? What's the first state that our world was ever in? A garden. And not any garden. God's garden. The Garden of Eden. And isn't it fascinating how we've forgotten that? That the original design of this world was a garden. Now, here in South Africa, we're very privileged. I don't know how it is by you. Most people have large gardens. And because of the coronavirus and the fact that people haven't been around and they haven't been working as usual, many of those gardens are currently jungles. These are the jungles of Africa. They're in our backyards. So what does it mean it's a jungle? It just means go clean it up and you'll find the garden again. It is absolutely fundamental to our belief as Jewish people that the world is a place of goodness, of light, of beauty, if you just pull out the weeds, if you just clean it up a little bit. The default, original design state of this world is beautiful. That's what God tells us in our Bible. If we don't believe in a Mashiach, if we don't believe in a world that will once again be that magnificent garden, if we don't believe that our world will once again be as God intended it, a place of revelation, a place of connection, a place of harmony, then we deny God's design. So for us as Jewish people, the idea of a messianic age, the idea of a Mashiach, the idea of a utopian world is not far-fetched. It's more far-fetched to imagine that God designed a beautiful world and then it got broken and it can never be fixed again. That's why for us it's such a central theme. But still, you could ask the question, and here's where we're going to get to the fun part of the conversation. Yeah, but it hasn't happened till now. So what are the chances? I'm sorry to use such a metaphor, but it illustrates the point really well. Do you know the story of the psychology of the Thanksgiving turkey? I don't know who did the research and who interviewed Thanksgiving turkey, but you know the story? So the story goes like this. There are a whole bunch of turkeys on the farm, and about a month before Thanksgiving, the farmer decides which turkey it is that he plans to use this year for dinner. So he starts to feed that turkey a little bit more than the others because this is the one who's going to be fattening up for the slaughter. But the turkey suddenly realizes, whoa, look at this. I'm the one who's getting fed more than everybody else. So this turkey starts like walking around, clucking, you know, I'm a big deal. I'm a ganze Knacker, as we say in Yiddish. You know, like I'm the famous individual because look how much the farmer's showering attention on me. And each day that goes by, the turkey becomes more convinced that he is the favorite on the farm. So let me ask you this question. At which point in the turkey's life will that turkey be most convinced that life is good? On the day before Thanksgiving. In other words, his delusion that he creates based on his perspective, based on historical facts, misleads him to believe that the best day of his life is in fact what's going to be the last day of his life. So if we take that principle and we reverse it, we could say the same thing. This is exactly what we do. The Mashiach has never come. Let's be honest, we've been through thousands of years of Jewish strife and difficulty and persecution, and he's never come before. What are the chances it's going to really happen? It's the same thinking. The Talmud tells us Mashiach comes when you least expect it. When we reach a collective consciousness that says, nah, it's not going to be. And the proof is because there were really great generations, prophets, Talmudic sages, medieval scholars. They didn't get it. They didn't do it. What are our chances? And so in an inverse graph, we're on the opposite end of the psychology of the turkey, where just before the Messiah comes is probably when we'll be least prepared for it. We'll be most convinced it could never happen. So here's the fun part. What are the chances? What are the chances? What are the chances? Us living in the 21st century, modern thinking, rational people who have science at our fingertips. Really, what are the chances of this mythical Messiah? Well, it boils down to this. Either we don't know enough about the Mashiach, or we don't know enough about what's happening in our worlds, or both. The first Chabad Rebbe some 200 years ago said, Mashiach is not going to swoop out of the heavens and make some kind of spiritual announcement. You're going to read about Mashiach in the papers. Okay, so let's update that. It basically means you're going to get a WhatsApp, or it's going to be on Twitter or something like that. In other words, what he was saying is Mashiach, the experience, the world that we look forward to, this utopian environment, is going to unfold in a way that is as newsworthy as any other item in the news. Read the papers, you'll find out what's going on. You'll find out the messianic message. So there's an interesting saying from the Zohar. I don't know how many people over here study Zohar in their spare time. The Zohar is the key teaching of all Kabbalistic literature. So all real Jewish mysticism, the thick, heavy esotericism of Judaism, starts off in this book called the Zohar. So the Zohar says this: if you go back to the story of Noah's flood, we're told that the flood began at a particular point in history that coincided with the 600th year of Noah's life. Then from that, the Zohar makes a prediction, and this prediction is mind-blowing. The Zohar says, just as then, at that point in time, the 600th year, these floods began, and there were two types of floods. The Bible tells us it was water that came out of the ground, and it was water that rained down. So there were these subterranean wells that kind of exploded, some of them a little bit more volcanic, and there was rain. Says the Zohar, when we reach the 6th millennium on the Jewish calendar, which means we're in the years that are 5,000 something or other, and then within that 6th millennium, when we get into the 6th century of that 6th millennium, so that's after 5,500 and something, there will be another flood. This flood will not be water. This flood will not be destructive. This flood, says the Zohar, will be a flood of knowledge. And it will be such a deluge of knowledge that it will seep into every society, every environment. It will be inescapable. And just like the biblical flood, where there was water that rained down from on high, and there was water that welled up from below, there'll be two kinds of knowledge that will be revealed to the world. One will be spiritual knowledge. We'll have insight and mystical insight that we've never had before. And the other is that there'll be knowledge about our world, how it works, and how we can harness the greatness within our world in a way that has never happened before. So if you do the calculation, it works out to around about the Industrial Revolution. This prediction of the Zohar from 2,000 years ago effectively gives the date range of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which of course led to the technological revolution and the scientific revolution. And that's where we have to look. We have to look at what's going on in the world. We have to know how to read the news. I mean, everybody reads the news, but do we know how to read the news as Jewish people? If we know how to read the news and we're familiar with the prophecies of our Bible and the predictions of our sages, it's like a connecting the dots. In 1992, in a public address, the Rebbe said, Mashiach is here. We just have to open our eyes. That means that the reality is unfolding around us. We just have to know what to look for. So we could talk about this for an incredibly long time, which I'm not going to do. I just want to use a few examples, interesting examples that I'm just going to share with you a little bit of information and a little bit of what the Torah says or said many centuries ago, and you can connect the dots. And really the purpose of our conversation is not to sell you a story about Moshiach, it's to pique your curiosity. So hopefully after this, you'll explore it further. And hopefully after this, you'll also have a bias to look at world events and the development of science, technology, and the news and say, I wonder, could that possibly be aligned with a Mashiach experience? Mashiach is not a 1 second the world is one way and the next second it's another way. Mashiach is a natural, organic unfolding. You know, like the kind of unfolding where one day you look in the mirror and you say, wow, how did I get to this point? But if you have friends or family who you haven't seen for a few years, they arrive and they say, we can see the difference. In other words, an organic process, you don't feel it happening until there's an aha moment. And we, the Rebbe says, we're in an organic period of time where the Messianic age is unfolding in front of us. And perhaps one of the first places to start is that the promise in all of the prophets about what's going to happen in the Messianic age is health, longevity, and health. If you go back at the time of the giving of the Torah at Sinai, one of the miracles that happened to all of the people who were gathered at the foot of Sinai is that they had miraculous healing. But that was just supposed to be a taste, a glimpse, a sampling of what life will be like in the time of Mashiach. In the time of Mashiach, there's widespread and absolute health improvement, longevity. And here's where it's really interesting. In South Africa last year, or perhaps it was the year before, I don't remember, it's a bit of a time warp last year. I think everybody lost track of time last year. There was January, February, and then like December. That's pretty much how it worked last year. So at some point, they had these massive billboards for one of the biggest life insurance companies here in South Africa. They had a marketing campaign that said, the first person to live to 200 years has already been born. Now, that's quite an interesting marketing approach if you're selling life insurance. But anyhow, that's what they put up on the billboards. And the truth is, the science bears it out. We know that to date, the longest recorded lifespan was 122 years. A French woman, Jean, well, I think if you pronounce it, Jean Calment, who passed away in 1997, at 122 years old. But what's interesting about it is that scientists today are even talking about the concept of our grandchildren possibly living 1,000 years. There's a guy called Dr. David Goldhill who wrote a book on longevity, and that's his theory. He's not the only one. There are many other scientists who talk this language, and it's quite bizarre when you think about it, because the concept of living for an extended period of time, our prophets tell us that in the Messianic age, a person who dies young will die at 100 years old. Now, for the last number of years, the amount of centenarians in the world has doubled every 18 months. This is going on almost a decade. He says, Goldhill says in his book, that if you have a look at lifespans in today's world, on average, every decade, the average lifespan increases 2.5 years. Now, I know that some people are not so excited about that. Some people are like, who would want to live on this planet for such a long period of time? Well, plug into that all these other different predictions and promises that our sages give us of the Messianic period, and you see it's actually not so bad. It's supposed to be a time of plenty. It's supposed to be a time of harmony. It's supposed to be a time of learning. It's supposed to be a time of connection. So let's not get all too excited about how rough the world is going to be, and rather embrace the opportunity. You know, where do they even do the research on these things? So quite a number of years ago, one of the hang on one second. Let's just pause 1 second before we get into this experiment. One of the things we have to know is that science believes very strongly in the need to cure diseases, right? Everybody will agree with that. And so the bigger the disease is, and the more people who are affected by it, the bigger the excitement within the scientific community to try and cure the disease. So here's a question. And again, if this was interactive, it would be a lot more fun. But what is the single most prevalent disease in the world today? And it is fatal in all cases. I don't know who's quick on the type. You know, it's not, stick something into the chat box over there. But what's the single most prolific disease in today's world, fatal in all cases? All right, I'll help you out over here. Aging. Every single person who ages will eventually die from it. And if science is interested in curing diseases that are fatal, this would be one of them, especially when you consider now that we've mapped the human genome and we understand that there are periods in the development of a human being where the human body actually only improves. Not only improves, we know that a fetus in utero is capable of regenerating certain parts of the body that perhaps might have been damaged in some way. We also know that there are creatures on Earth that are able to regenerate parts of their body, cell regeneration, like the lizard's tail as an example. Now imagine we could plug that into genetics, and we could regenerate the parts of the body that have started to decline. As the Mishnah says, you hit 30 years old, and that's it, that's the peak. I know people don't like to hear this. Everybody thinks that 60 is the new 30 or 70, whatever the case is. But the Mishnah says there's a certain point, there's a pinnacle of development, and science bears it out. We know this because think of it, a child improves from the time they're born. They develop from being unable to walk to be able to walk, from being unable to talk to being able to talk. And we understand now that at a certain point in our lives, the genetic process that allows the body to improve stops and then begins to reverse. And that's how you get the regression and the degeneration that eventually leads a person to pass away. So we now know that it's a disease because it's something in the body that stops working as it should. We know that it's genetic. We know, therefore, that everything genetic potentially has a way to fix it. So there's the scientific thinking that says we could actually and should actually fight the concept of death. Our sages in the Talmud spoke about this. They said at the time leading to the Messianic era, they'll start to break down cemeteries, meaning to say symbolically they won't need them anymore. And once the Mashiach is already here, the verse says very clearly, death will be swallowed up forever. But we're talking over here how you can see it unfolding even before Mashiach comes, because we're living through this period. So the experiment that they do is they take these worms, I forget what they or snails actually, and they live for an incredibly long period of time. And they try and understand what is the nature of the genetic makeup of these snails that live like 200 years. And then they take other types of creatures, worms and flies and things like that, that live for 72 hours on average. And they apply the genetic modifications. And guess what? There is already the beginnings of the ability to shift and move and expand and extend lifespan. Well, there are many, many things we could talk about. I didn't realize how quickly the time is going. So 2 more things that we'll do, and then we'll open up for questions. One is that we have the prophecy of Isaiah that says, when the Mashiach comes, they, the nations of the world, will beat their swords into plowshares. Now, most people don't even know what plowshares are anymore, unless you live in a more rural part of the world. And besides which, who's carrying a sword? If the message is that there'll be world peace, why didn't you just say it? Why do these prophets always speak in riddles? Just say there will be world peace. But the point is that Isaiah wants us to know it's not just world peace. It's the reason that this is the line that is emblazoned on the peace wall outside the United Nations in a whole string of languages, because that is ostensibly what the United Nations is supposed to achieve. He doesn't just say peace. He says, take what was a weapon and turn it into something of benefit to humankind. So again, if we had the opportunity to do a little bit of banter over here, I would ask you, how many things could you think of in our world today that were originally invented for purposes of conflict and war, and yet today are used for the benefit of humanity? So a few little examples: nuclear energy, laser technology, satellites, the internet. And one of my favorite, which is from 30 years ago, the Gulf War in Iraq, where they developed for the first time precision bombing technology, and then took that technology and put it into medicine, and specifically radiation treatment for cancer, where you could zoom in on the particular tumor rather than allowing the whole body to be exposed to radiation. So there's one little insight. Another little thought for us, and this is what I'll wrap up with for now. It's always good, I suppose, to leave everybody kind of, looking for more. But I do want to give an opportunity also for questions and answers. I always like to look around and see what's happening in the world at the moment. What's happening in politics? What's happening in the environment? What's happening in technology? What's happening in science? And see if any of that resonates with anything that the sages tell us about the Messianic age. So here's a few. I'll just share 4 with you. The first one was, actually, I'll share 3, so we can just stick with things that are from this month, from January 2021. On the 12th of January this year, big news, and I'm sure you saw it, coming out of Israel, where Israeli technology was able to produce a synthetic cornea, which they successfully implanted in a 78-year-old man who had been blind for 10 years and successfully restored his eyesight. Now, that's an incredible thought, right? It was all over the news. I imagine you must have seen it. This was in Petah Tikva in the Rabin Medical Center, what used to be called the Bellinson Hospital. Now, it's fascinating, not only because of the incredible ability to regenerate or assist or help the human body. You reach a certain age and people ask you, what's new? And you say, most of me, because that's what we're able to do today. All these prosthetic elements that we put inside people, and we replace hips, and we put things in people's ears. And now, it's this whole integration, what some people will call the singularity, if you're really a conspiracy theorist. But the idea is that God is granting us wisdom, this wisdom that flows up from beneath, from the world in which we live, which is supposed to, as the Zohar says, pave the way for the Messianic age. And it's interesting that it would specifically be about vision, because at the time of the giving of the Torah, people who were blind were gifted with the opportunity to see again. And in the Messianic age, one of the big things that is meant to happen is visual learning. The way we learn today is primarily either through books or listening. When you listen, you can only hear one sentence at a time. But when you can see a concept in front of you, visual learning, then it comes to life, which is exactly where we're going in today's world with things like augmented or virtual reality, that you can actually see the things that you're learning about in full three-dimensional immersive experience instead of just reading about it in a book or listening to me and taking my word for it. Isn't it amazing if you could actually see things? Well, that's where the world is headed in the Messianic age. It gets more interesting. On the 14th of January this year, scientists in Copenhagen announced that they are now using artificial intelligence, which is a whole interesting subject in its own right, to analyze the bacteria in human intestines, because we understand bacteria plays a very big role in our health. If you have healthy bacteria in your system, you do well. God forbid the bacteria is not so healthy, well, then you get exposed to all kinds of things like diabetes, obesity, or even things like schizophrenia and autism. Now, we obviously cannot compute at the same speed and with the same levels of accuracy as AI can. So that means that this opens a whole new world to understanding what it is that's in our gut that might be making us ill. And then, of course, the next step would be to fix it. Artificial intelligence, I think, would very much fit into the category of this flood of intelligence that fills the world completely. And the last one we'll do for now, and then we can have conversation. I see there are a number of questions already in the chat. So this one is really, really intriguing. It came up in the news on the 15th of this month, but apparently it's something that's been bandied around already for many, many years. It's quite a mind-blowing concept. We know that one of the greatest problems we face on this planet is energy, and specifically clean energy. Yes, we have solar power and we should probably use it a lot more than we do. But in addition to that, would you believe it, there are scientists on this planet, some of them highly respected, who are coming up with various theories about the immense energy that a black hole would emit. And if there's a way to get, without getting overly technical, two particles where one of them crosses over the event horizon into the black hole and the other one remains behind, you could actually generate this incredibly immense kind of energy coming out of a black hole that is way more than any of the energy we have ever experienced here on Earth. And that could, of course, power cities and do all kinds of things that would be clean energy. But what's fascinating about that is that we're taught the Messianic age is the time where darkness turns into light. And that's fascinating. When scientists, people with PhDs, people who really understand the world, who are not in any way into this far-fetched Messianic happy-clappy stuff, start talking about capturing dark energy to produce light. For us as Jewish people, that is Mashiach language. So are we expecting that in the next 5 minutes, somebody's going to fly down and turn our world on its head? Maybe, maybe not. But for sure, without question, we have a responsibility as Jewish people to believe that the world is fundamentally a place of beauty and goodness and godliness. And we are responsible as Jewish people to be part of making the world a place of beauty and goodness and godliness. And we are responsible to live with open eyes and open minds so that we can actually appreciate what's going on around us, to watch all the parts of the world that are helping it to become good and beautiful and godly again. So that's where I'm going to pause for now, because I see there are many questions over here, and let's see if we can get to all of them. So what I should have done is,
yeah, I can pose them to you, Rabbi. You go back and I'll you'll see if you can respond.
Okay, that's perfect. You pose it. That'd be great.
Yeah, and I'll say, if someone is not technologically savvy and doesn't figure out where the chat is, on a computer screen, it's on the bottom of your screen is a button called chat. If not, I will give an opportunity in a few minutes to unmute yourself, and you can ask a question if you do not know how to put it in the chat. So so that's that. Let me see where we have a question in. When will we know when Mashiach actually is here? What will be the actual sign? Where you're talking about a transformation, and we're in an era leading up to Mashiach. Is there going to be something someone's asking that will actually know that Mashiach is here?
It's a really good question. And there has to be some kind of clarity. Otherwise, what's the point? So that reminds me of the story of the old Jewish Yid back in the shtetl in Russia, and he had a neighbor who was, they had one of these interesting relationships. The neighbor was Ivan, the classic Cossack, wasn't necessarily his best friend. So one day Ivan says to this Jewish guy, he says, "You always talk about your Messiah coming. I want to know, if your Messiah comes and I'm not interested in him, what are you going to do then?" So the Jewish guy says to him, "If my Messiah comes and you don't believe in him, then he's not the real deal." In other words, the concept is that when we reach this tipping point, and I think that's a good way to describe it, because you push, and then you hit a tipping point. When we hit the tipping point, it will be so compelling and it will be so clear. The greatest proof of the fact that it will have happened will be the fact that those who typically should have denied its validity will acknowledge its validity. So we don't have to prove anything to anybody else. It should be self-evident.
Beautiful. And I will reiterate what you said before, that Mashiach will come when we're least expecting it. So when people always tell me a lot, they don't think the world's ready for it, but Mashiach will come when we least expect that it will come, and you'll be like, it's here within a.
Right.
Another question came. You kind of started addressing it really. We talked about the flood of knowledge. Is that connected to or equal to the AI? In some respect, and I think you already started talking about artificial intelligence.
Yes, it's fascinating. I think we've got to be really careful with AI because it is a little bit controversial, right? We know that there are certain people, leading people in the world of technology, who are afraid of AI. I think Elon Musk is one of them. And from a Jewish perspective, the fact that we have remember, anything could be used as positive or negative. Nuclear energy could be hugely destructive, and at the same time, it could completely elevate cities and help our lives in such an incredible way. Somebody once came to the Rebbe and asked a question, I believe it was about nuclear energy, and the Rebbe said, "Well, is a knife good or bad?" And the answer was, it all depends who's using it and what they're using it for. AI is the most incredible thing. If you imagine how well AI can compute, how well it can assist us in the diagnosis of illness, which is where we're going, and in the diagnosis of the structural integrity of buildings, or the ability to detect a threat, whether it be a seismic threat or a hurricane threat, or whatever it is. These are things that we could not do at the speed necessary and with the objectivity necessary. So is AI part of the flood of the so-called lower knowledge? Absolutely, it has to be. Can it be abused? Unfortunately, like anything else. But we're going to focus on the positive, and we're going to focus on the opportunity that it provides for us to be able to elevate the world to a better place. Just one little example. A number of years ago, I was in Pittsburgh when they were doing the trial of the autonomous Ubers. And I had to get to the airport, and I had to order an Uber, and I was praying, please send an autonomous Uber. I was so keen to have the experience. Anyhow, it didn't work out. The guy was, it was a very early morning flight, so the guy was as good as an autonomous Uber, I guess. But the point is, what's the chap? What's so exciting about autonomous cars? Well, in today's world, on average, for every 10,000 kilometers driven on the world's roads, there is a serious car accident. And the minute you would transform into AI, autonomous vehicles, that would go down to an accident one every 10 million kilometers driven, just as an example. So AI could potentially be an incredibly positive thing.
Beautiful. I want to just touch quickly on also what you mentioned about medical advances. And I know that because my father personally benefited in his treatment for many years. For those who are familiar with what he did, he was a master of his own research, and so he was looking into specifically targeted treatments. And you mentioned about the targeted bombing and things like that, which was used initially for warfare, and then it was also used later on in the medical world. And I know that he benefited personally from that, which gave him many years of his life, not a question.
Sure, that's powerful. That's really something.
Okay,
so if I can just jump in for 1 second, just on that point. It's just an inspirational thing that I want to share with you. A guy from our community called me on Friday. He's 40 years old, got married just over a year ago. 3 months after getting married, he was diagnosed with a very unique melanoma. and they had no treatment available for him a year and a half ago. And as of this month, there's a new treatment available, and it's potentially going to save his life. So that's the speed at which medical advancement happens in today's world.
Here's a question that came. When we talk about Mashiach, a lot of times people think of an era which is like a perfect world almost. So the question was posed: is there such a thing as perfection? I guess, are we going to be perfect when Mashiach comes? When we're leading up to when Mashiach actually comes, are we going to be perfect?
Perfection is boring. You know, it says that when God created the world, the sages tell us he created a perfect world. And the first thing he did after creating a perfect world is he put a human into it and said, make it better. In other words, the design of how God intends all of existence to be is that perfect does not mean you cannot get better than that. So in other words, in our reality right now, a lot of our growth, a lot of what makes us who we are is our failures, our missteps, the regrets that we have, how we come back from the abyss. It's a lot of what makes us who we are. It's what makes life full. What will happen in the age of Mashiach is that the negative, the dark side of all of that will be released. And then he'll introduce, much in the same way as you cannot imagine a new technology until it's available, right? So nobody could have imagined, for example, you know, they say that, I don't remember offhand who it was, who made a comment when they came out with the first desktop computers. So one of the leading people at the time, I don't remember who it was, made a comment that there'll never be a need in the world for more than a few hundred PCs, right? Before a technology exists, it's impossible to imagine. It's impossible to imagine wireless technology in our world, even though we have it. But could you imagine having a wireless oven? Could you imagine? It's difficult. So by the same token, it's difficult for us to imagine that God will launch a different technology within which we will live, where there'll be plenty of opportunity to improve. So in other words, we won't have perfection as in there's nothing to improve. Great opportunity to improve and to have the depth that comes with that, just without all the drag of the negativity we're used to, the ugliness that we're used to in this world.
Yeah, and it's interesting you're talking about wireless technology. You know, the famous story, the two archaeologists were talking, the American and Israeli, and the American archaeologist saying was, we found out that we had, you know, electricity and things like that before, you know, people thought it was invented. It was actually, we dug down, we found wires that were dated from way back when, before, you know, the electricity as we know it. And the Israeli says, well, we actually found out we had wireless way back when. It's like, how do you know? We dug down and we found nothing.
Exactly.
Another question came up, and we're gonna have another 2 or 3 more questions, and I want to give tell everyone Rabbi Shishler is right now at midnight right now where he is, so we'll give a little sensitivity to his time right now. So another question came. You know, people sometimes you hear about Mashiach, you don't want life to change. For many, some people want life to change, some people don't. They're happy with where things are taking them, and you know, maybe some people make peace with dying at one point. And what if people are scared for Mashiach to come?
I think it's very normal for people to be afraid, because one of the greatest fears that we carry with us is fear of the unknown. That's the truth. I often think, picture the scene. Imagine you have 2-3 families get together for whatever, just for an afternoon lunch, Sunday afternoon lunch. And the men are sitting talking about the stock market. The women are sitting talking about whatever it is that they're talking about, parenting or managing the household or their careers or whatever it is. And the kids are playing in the doll's corner. And the kids look at the parents and say, I hope we never grow up to be like that. They are so boring. Look what we're doing over here, so much fun. But all they ever talk about is that market. I don't know what this market is, that things are going up and going down and numbers. So boring. I hope we never grow up to be that way. So it's exactly the same with us. You know, when you grow up, if you grow up in a wholesome environment, you get to keep the good things and just add more to them. So there's a famous talk that the Rebbe gave about how the Messianic age means whatever you love about life, as long as it's healthy, will remain and will just get better. And he said, you know who the people are who don't want Mashiach to come more than anybody else? Doctors. because they'll be out of a job. Everybody's going to be healthy. They'll be out of it. So the Rebbe said, don't worry, because we know how people are, especially Jews. They'll still go to the doctor just to make sure that they're okay. The only people, the Rebbe did not say this, but I'm going to say it. You know who's really going to be out of a job? You know who should be the most afraid of Mashiach? Rabbis. Because it says that when Mashiach comes, everybody knows God. So we'll be out of a job. If we're not afraid, you can be assured everything's going to be okay.
Very good. Very good. I'm going to let for anyone who wants to ask a physical question. My son Mayor wants to say something. Okay. It's like, hi, Element. Hi. There we go.
Hi.
So I'm going to allow people to unmute if you want. So I'm going to click here. If you click your mute button, you'll be able to unmute yourself. If you have a question only, you can unmute yourself if you have a question for Rabbi Shishler. And we'll, as we have our last few minutes here with him, let's utilize every moment of it.
Rabbi, this is Rand Post. I really am very grateful for your time. Thank you so much. And you look great for midnight. You look really good.
Don't tell anybody I look this great at this time of night, because could land me up in a lot of other jobs.
I won't. My question is for the rest of your life, do you have specific goals that you look at every day that you'd like to achieve, to really fulfill everything that you set out to do in your life? Is there anything personally, professionally, or otherwise that you're looking to do before, between now and the end?
It's a really good question. And I find it difficult to say that it's static. In other words, I find it difficult to say that there's a set of goals that have been in place for a period of time, because I think we have to be dynamic people. So for me personally, my biggest thing is to reach, touch, and teach. That's my goal, to reach, touch, and teach as many as possible.
Very good, very good. And I will say, as a rabbi and as a Chabad rabbi, the goal, as the Rebbe always taught us, was really to do what we can to bring Mashiach, which is taking the world, trying to transform in every way possible we can. Any last questions here? If you can post in the chat. Last question. Okay, I think, is that it? All right, Rabbi, anything to conclude with?
So I think exactly just as you have said, a little earlier this evening, this is the wonders of Zoom. To sit in the same seat and speak earlier this evening in England and now speak in the States. So earlier the topic was the Rebbe's attitude to the atomic age, and it really, really resonated. I didn't suggest the topic, they suggested the topic, but it really resonated because there's a teaching of Maimonides that the Rebbe always spoke about, and it's the nuclear impact of all of us. If you look in Jewish history, we're a small nation. We've always been a small nation. And for most of history, the thinking people had was if you're small, you have little impact. And ever since we entered the atomic age, we realized that if you're small, you could have global impact. So Maimonides teaches that at every given moment, every one of us has the potential, by one choice, by one act, by one good deed that we do, to flip the whole world over the edge into the Messianic age. It's a nuclear impact. And so that's really the take-home message. You don't have to be a professional. You don't have to wear a black hat. You don't have to get perfection in your Judaism. But the next choice that we make, the next thing that we choose to do in line with what God wants from us, could literally be that final stroke that takes our world to where it needs to be to, where it needs to get to. So that's what we should grab. Don't wait. Don't procrastinate. Today, do one little thing. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering. One small mitzvah. And you never know what kind of an impact that could be. And please God, Mashiach arrives and he says, thank you. You made it happen.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi Shishler. We really appreciate you taking the time all the way from South Africa. And we genuinely appreciate it. I know we had recently a lot of interest in this topic. And so I hope people gain some information from this. I definitely did as well. And so I thank you for that. I want to thank everyone here for joining as well. It was really nice to see everyone again. Hopefully more in person. We are having upcoming Purim things happening at the show parking lot as well. So stay tuned for all the great things coming up ahead. Please God, with the coming of Mashiach very, very soon.
Amen. Thank you very much. It was beautiful to interact with you all.
Which one? Very good.
Very enjoyable. Good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for joining.
Wonderful.
Very good. Michael, you don't know questions?
I'm trying to think it out before.
We'll let it settle. Okay, I'll take the brunt of it.
Yes.
Rabbi Shishler, you won't have to suffer from this one. Okay, I'm kidding. I always enjoy. Michael has always.
I'm not sure that's a compliment.
It's a major compliment.
I don't know. Rabbi, what do you think?
I think if you have that level of banter between you, it's a great compliment.
Listen, rabbis love challenges, and not everyone likes to challenge a rabbi. And Michael loves to. I love it.
That's true. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. Stay well.
Good night, and thank you for joining.
All the best.